You are listening to the Grama Spotlight Episode 2. We are going to continue looking at documents around the October 20th, 2021 election hearing. This gives you a sneak peek behind the scenes of what goes on prior to these legislative committees. In this document, it is an email from Ricky Hatch on Tuesday, September 28th, 2021. It is titled Preparation and for Information for Wednesday's Election Legislative Discussion. This was sent by Karen Peterson, the Legislative Affairs Director for the Office of Lieutenant Governor, to John, whoever that is, and it was sent on October 12th, 2021. And this outlines their strategy for legislation here in Utah and the approach they want to take in regards to election integrity. So Ricky Hatch starts out his email saying, really looking forward to tomorrow's discussion on rebuilding confidence in Utah's elections. To make the most of our time together, please see the email below in the attached draft document. Thank you, Curtis and Ricky. I am assuming Curtis is Curtis Koch, the Davis County Clerk. Ricky Hatch, of course, is the Weber County Clerk. If you do not know about Ricky Hatch, you can listen to the Grama Spotlight episode 1, and it shows all of the boards that Ricky Hatch is on nationwide. Now, when you request emails, if you want the attached documents, you have to say that in your request. This request did not have that, so we do not have the attached documents, but we do have the rest of the email. So in this email, it is called A Four-Fold Approach to Rebuild Confidence in Utah's Elections. Now, notice the title, A Fourfold Approach to Rebuild Confidence. They're not wanting to have transparency. They're not wanting to address any issues. According to this title, it sounds like they just want to control the narrative. But let's keep going and see if that's actually the case. So it continues. Utah's elections have been increasingly secure for many years because the Lieutenant Governor's office, legislator, clerks, and vendors have proactively sought security, accuracy, and integrity. With the continuing dissemination of doubt about the integrity of the 2020 election, the clerks would like to partner with the Lieutenant Governor's office and the legislature to rebuild public trust in Utah's elections and achieve sensible and effective election-related legislation. We realize that certain members of the legislature and public will not be convinced that Utah's elections are secure regardless of evidence we provide. This approach is not designed to address their concerns. Our audience is the approximate 1/3 of Utah's voters and the legislators who represent them who currently have doubts about the integrity of Utah's elections. Okay, I think that paragraph needs to be reread. So, we realize that certain members of the legislature and public will not be convinced that Utah's elections are secure regardless of the evidence we provide. This approach is not designed to address their concerns. Okay, so first of all, they are not providing any evidence. They're controlling the narrative. 2, they're saying anyone who has questions about elections, they're not going to address them, and they have no regard whatsoever for them. According to this email, they're not going to address their concerns. They have no regard for them. So that's very telling. Let's continue reading. Currently, the legislator has only 2 options regarding elections-related legislation. Continue with the status quo, or enact dramatic and potentially harmful legislation that it could establish costly and ineffective Maricopa-style election audits. We need, and sensible legislators are asking for, a third option. So they have said that they continue as they are right now, or dramatically potentially harmful legislation, and an audit. But they want a third option. This is their third option. This is their fourfold approach. The fourfold approach to rebuild confidence in Utah's election. 1. Preempt potentially harmful election reform legislation by proactively identifying and proclaiming A. Integrity of the current system, defining a risk and control structure. B. Legislation that will achieve improvements and controls, preferably not heavily prescriptive legislation, but rather administrative rules of standards and practices from the Lieutenant Governor's office. Let's read B again. B. legislation that will achieve improvements and controls, not with legislation, but rather administrative rules from the Lieutenant Governor's office. So they want to move our elections from legislators into administrative law, which means they have full control. We no longer go to the legislator to make changes. The legislator no longer has say. The legislator gives control to the Lieutenant Governor's office. Now, I have been telling people that our elections in Utah are not decentralized. They are centralized through the Lieutenant Governor's office, and now she wants more control in the Lieutenant Governor's office. And remember, who was the Lieutenant Governor? Spencer Cox. So all of this is continuation of his policies to centralize Utah's elections. This actually happened in 2022. They actually passed legislation that gave the Lieutenant Governor's office administrative authority and removed the legislature authority, meaning we don't have to pass legislation. It becomes regulations in the Lieutenant Governor's office. So let's read a little bit more about what they were wanting to do with this legislation and with this administrative control in the Lieutenant Governor's office. First was Lieutenant Governor's office's auditing of the voter registration database. 2 was randomized performance of election system hash validations. 3, establish requirements regarding chain of custody for election equipment. 4, observance from the Lieutenant Governor's office on randomly selected LNA and post-election audits. 5, written policies and procedures for counties with the help of the Lieutenant Governor's office that ensure adequate controls for ballot custody, processing, and tabulation. So what are they doing? What is their goal? Their goal is to take all of these things and have it be done in the Lieutenant Governor's office. Centralization of our elections. The counties are not told, hey, here's some things you need to make sure you do in your county. We're going to oversee that. Oh, no. Control. All these controls are being done in Lieutenant Governor's office. And HB 313, it was completely chopped up by the Lieutenant Governor's office, Ricky Hatch, and others. And the intent of that bill and the best things in that bill were removed. And one of the things that was in there, again, was enacting this fourfold approach, centralizing our elections with power and control in our Lieutenant Governor's office. The second approach is, and I'm going to continue reading, 2, educating the legislators about existing process and controls. So, education the legislators. Number 3, continuing support for Olene Walker vote certification, which demonstrates an ongoing commitment to professionalism of Utah's election officials. Number 4, public relation efforts. Okay, so we're going to add in more nonprofits with influence and control, and they're already there. They're just going to continue that support and make it greater, which probably comes through funding and other things, and public relations. So here's their next suggested steps. Lieutenant Governor's office and clerks identify the best approach, both legislation and public relation efforts. Number 2, provide risk and control documents to clerks to review for self-evaluation. Zoom meeting with Lieutenant Governor's office and clerks to discuss high-level strategy. 3, determine the roles of the Lieutenant Governor and Clerks Association in executing the strategy. Lieutenant Governor's office and clerks invite legislators and party leaders to observe ballot processing for the November election. Number 5, at the Utah Association of Counties in November, clerks and legislators' office discuss detailed approach to get approval funding for a public relations effort. Number 7, public relations effort aimed toward legislature and media. Number 8, public relations efforts aimed toward general public and media. Okay, so how are they going to approach election integrity? We already have seen some of this happen. So now we're able to do hindsight is 2020, right? So we're able to take this Grama request from September and see how they're enacting it. Not once did they choose to listen to the people. Did they ever bring the people into this? Were the people a part of any of this? No. In fact, they said anyone asking about this, they're going to completely disregard. It's all about public relations, controlling the legislation, because they were going to remove it from the legislators and give it to the administrative law in the Lieutenant Governor's office. We're also going to remove controls and processes in the county level and move it to the Lieutenant Governor's office so that they don't have a say. They just do what the Lieutenant Governor tells them to. And then you can also see that they are also taking the approach that it's all about public relations. It's not about transparency. It's not about letting the public know what's going on. It's about controlling the narrative. So this email is another Grama request that is really important to why we need transparency, because it is another example of centralization of our elections here in Utah, and another example of the control that the Lieutenant Governor's office, nonprofits, and others want to have over Utah's elections. To look at this Grama record and others, go to getinvolvedutah.com and sign up for a free account and access the Grama Records library.